TDPK Podcasts, Thailand GameChanger, inside the minds of Thailand's innovators. Hi, this is Michael Waitze, and welcome back to Thailand GameChanger. Today, I'm joined by Jaruthassanakul, a senior investment manager at 500 Startups. I got it, right?
Yep, exactly.
Always get nervous. How are you doing today?
Very well, Michael. I'm very happy to be here. So thanks for the invite.
Look, I've been excited to do this for a long time. I know you're busy,
Yep.
so I'm glad you've made the time to do this. For our audience, can you give us a little bit of your background so we can just get some context?
Okay, sure. So like you said, my name is Tu. So if any of you are wondering, we keep it very simple in the family. So I'm just the second child, hence the name Tu.
But then why the two W's? Or is that like a little bit of a play on the name?
A little bit of a play because I added it in myself because, you know, when you're seeing my name in emails or whatever, then some people get confused with the numbers, right? So I just want to distinguish it from the number, basically.
I've wanted to ask you that for the longest time, and I was never sure how to pronounce it, right? Because I wasn't sure if the W had another sound it was meant to be.
Right.
Okay, that's kind of cool. So wait a second. If you're the second, how many are you in your family?
Only two of us, and my brother name is R, so R2. Unfortunately, no
D
D2.
and no 2.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh my God. No C3PO in the family? Were your parents really Star Wars fans?
Well, my dad likes it, but he wasn't that like a hardcore of a fan. But, you know, I guess the name works.
That's awesome. Yeah. Okay, let's go back to this. So, like, what's your background really?
Okay, so born and raised in Thailand, you know, went to an international school. A lot of my family had background in finance and ran their own, you know, business. So I naturally geared towards finance when I was growing up. So ended up studying finance at Chulalongkorn University.
Right.
And then, you know, had stints at a multinational company for my internship, and then really aimed towards investment banking when I was still in uni.
All right.
But then actually during the internship, I learned a lot. I liked it, but I figured I wanted to explore more. There should be something more exciting around, and then eventually ended up as a program manager for an accelerator program out of Singapore called Impact Tech.
I want to get to that in a second, actually.
Okay,
Before we get to Impact Tech, I've always wanted to ask you as well where you went to high school.
Okay.
Because this English doesn't come from nowhere.
Right.
And it doesn't say on your profiles anywhere. So where did you go to school?
Okay, so I went to St. Stephen's International School.
Got it.
So it's a very small school, you know, 200, 300 kids in the school. And then I spent half a year in the Netherlands during uni for exchange. Yeah.
Okay, that must have been super cool. How old were you?
I was around 19.
Oh, okay. So not that young, but not that old.
Yeah.
Are your mom and dad also English speakers?
They were English speakers, but they... I wouldn't say they're super fluent.
Okay.
So dad spent a couple of years in the US to study. So they can communicate with you, right? But it wouldn't be as fluent as I am.
And your brother went to the same school as well?
Same school, same uni, same major actually, but we took completely different routes. Okay. So he has never worked a day in an office in his life.
Really?
Yeah. So he's always had this entrepreneurial spirit and tried to start, you know, little businesses here and there.
Okay.
You know, every time. So he really hated the office life, had like 2-3 weeks of internship, and he was like, this is not for me.
I'm never doing this ever again. Yeah. I did it for 20 something years. It destroyed my soul. So I completely understand his feeling. He was just smarter than I was and faster at making that decision. So good for him. So what made you first get interested in the venture capital world?
Right.
What year did you graduate from university?
2017.
Okay. So recently enough that the ecosystem was already starting to get built when you came out of school.
Right. So I think my initial goal was to get into the buy side in terms of investing, right? Investment management. So initial goal was to do IB for a few years and then hopefully move on to a hedge fund or private equity fund. Back in the days, there was only, you know, one fund around, right? 500 tuk-tuks. So I didn't really figure that it was a realistic option in Thailand. For doing VC because there were barely any funds around.
Fair enough. But you did go to Impact Tech, you said. And I remember, I think that's where you and I originally met.
Yep, exactly.
So it feels like a long time ago.
Feels like ages ago, actually, yeah.
But it wasn't that long ago.
Only a few years, yeah.
Right. So what was your experience like at Impact Tech?
Oh, it was like really transforming for me, right? I was much more introverted when I graduated, right? But then working with Yoav and Kiran, my two old bosses who are from Israel, right? You get a really different culture from what we're used to in Thailand. It's a very, you know, flat organization. They treated me like a friend, and they were very open and they really gave me a lot of responsibilities, right?
Right.
I was the first and only employee at the organization. I had to kind of go out and, build out the program, source startups to join the program where I didn't really even have a clear picture yet of what the program would be like, because there was nothing to look at.
Right.
And
they were just starting back then as well, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah, it was a completely new brand, right? So it was a challenge in sourcing startups and actually sourcing the mentors and the stakeholders to actually participate in the program. So it was a really, really good experience for me.
Do you have an inherent interest in ESG things?
So I would say I was way more passionate about it when I was graduating, after going abroad, seeing how well ran things were in Europe.
Right.
I wanted to came back and do good for Thailand and help Thailand move towards that, right? But then after my experience with Impact Tech, I kind of realized sometimes it's normal businesses also create a lot of impact, right? So the prime example would be, players like Grab, see how many jobs they created, in Thailand so far, right? And it's a very commercialized business, right? They're 100% for profit, but they can still create a lot of impact.
Yeah, I mean, look, last week, I think we had somebody from the CP group in here, and we spent most of that conversation talking about sustainability in the context of game development. So you're right. I mean, any company that's really paying attention should be paying attention to ESG and the SDGs, right? Yep. But you don't have to just do that.
Yep.
You should do all of it, I think.
Yep.
So fair enough. And I think Impact Tech is a good organization.
Definitely. Yeah.
But different than what you're doing now.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself a risk taker in other parts of your life? And you'll see why that's relevant in a second.
Yeah, I think definitely a risk taker, but maybe not to the extreme.
Like what? Like, do you skydive? Do you surf? That kind of thing?
I play a lot of sports, but not many of those extreme sports.
Okay.
But I play a lot of golf with my friends, and it's always side games going on. And I do actually take risks there. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. And you're comfortable with that, right?
Pretty much very comfortable. So I had to make decisions for my own since I was young, right? So it was actually my own decision to skip 3 years of high school and pick my own uni, right? So I actually left school at the end of year 10.
So I know a lot of people in Thailand, a lot of very well-educated people in Thailand that have done this. They just said, I'm not doing my last year or my second to last year of high school, and I'm going right to university. Was that a common event for you and your friends, or do I just happen to know a group of people that do that?
It wasn't too common. So I think the dilemma for a lot of these kids at that point was to, finish high school, spend the extra 2 or 3 years, and then go abroad to study, right? Or take those years off, have a gap year or whatever, and then go to uni and then have that working experience instead. So my trade-off was between, say, when I'm 21, having 2 years of working experience, or being graduated from, a good university abroad.
So did you do a gap year?
I had a gap year and then I went into uni.
And did you feel like being younger than everybody else was an advantage, a disadvantage, or did you just not notice?
I think it was definitely an advantage for me, right? So I think not now anymore, but 4 or 5 years back, I was always the youngest person in the room. Right. That could also be a good book name for me in the future.
That's a great book name, The Youngest Person in the Room. It's great. Yeah, so maybe we'll make that the title of this episode.
Yeah, so always being the youngest person in the room, you're always learning from people.
Right.
Especially growing up, people who are 1 to 3 years ahead of you in life.
Sure.
So you can actually learn, where they went wrong, where they went right, where you want to go by looking at those guys, right?
It's a really important thing to learn actually when you are younger, and that is finding the right mentors.
Right.
Which means being on the right team with the right leadership is actually way more important than it seems when you're a kid. And if you're savvy enough, you don't think that the things that older people are telling you or more experienced people are telling you is nagging. It's you take that mentoring in and understand they're just trying to help me. Is that fair?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier when I said what made you first interested in getting into VCs that there was only 500 tuk-tuks and there was no chance for you.
Right.
And that's what you do now.
Yep.
So when did you kind of make the decision that you wanted to move from Impact Tech? I think you went into 500 after that, right?
Yep. straight after. So I was at Impact Tech for over a year, and then after a while, it was kind of time for me to move on. It was kind of saturated there, where I built up the program, ran it for a few batches already, and now I'm ready to move on to actually going into VC. And at that point, I think more funds were popping up already. So
little bits and pieces, right?
Little bits and pieces. Right. So really interesting story was that I organized a few networking events with my friends that I met through work. And I met this amazing lady who I just told her about my aspirations to become a VC. And coincidentally, she was friends with Mamio, who's one of the partners at the fund right now. So when she saw Mamio posting a Facebook post, finding a new analyst.
Trying to find a new analyst. She was like, how about you?
Yeah, so she sent that over. Unfortunately, I didn't get it that time.
Really?
So I was traveling to Hong Kong with my family. And when I came back, they were like, applications are closed already. We found somebody already. Right. So that was, I think, in January. And then 6 months down the line, I actually quitted my job at Impact Tech, had another job lined up, which was to join a startup actually in a kind of a co-founding role. I was very hesitant, but I felt like I needed a change. But then out of the blue, this lady texted me again and was like, hey, 500 is recruiting again.
You're done.
And then now, second time around, I had the interview, and luckily things worked out.
What is Disrupt Technology Ventures or venture? What is that?
I would say it's the ecosystem building arm, right?
And did you work there as well? Do you work there
I do work there as well.
Is that related to 500?
It is related in terms of it is founded by the same guy, Grating. Right. So I would say in other markets for 500, right, we have the investment arm, the fund, and we actually have the ecosystem building arm, right? But Grating was doing that already. Before setting up the fund, right? So in Thailand, we kind of via Disrupt, we use that to help do supporting activities to the ecosystem rather than having, the 500 guys from abroad come in and do that ecosystem building activities.
So what are some of the things that go through Disrupt, and what are the things that you've learned there that helps you kind of in your day-to-day at
definitely.
500.
So an example would be the Stormbreaker Program, which is an accelerator for edtechs, right? I think you talked to Pat about it last time. So the experience there from helping startups from the very, very early stage, right? The idea stage, and helping them go through the journey till they have a product, they go out to test with the market, and then up until they raise their seed round. And even now, after 2-3 years of running the program, we have startups who have gone through our hackathon, went through the accelerators, and then have now been funded not by 500 tuk-tuks, but by other funds.
Fair enough, though, right? At least they're still getting the benefit of the knowledge that you've gained over time, right? When you first joined 500, was there some kind of training that you went through? Do you know what I mean? Because what you're doing at Impact was very different than what you're doing at 500. So same ecosystem, but now you're making investments, right? So how did you learn all that stuff? So
learning was mostly on the job, right? They really threw me into the deep waters from the get-go, right?
That's good,
and I think it's the best way to learn, because obviously, the other guys, Pima Mia, Pikating, Pimu, they're all super busy, right? So they really accelerated the learning by having me just do the deal memos, actually execute the investment process, and work with the lawyers, right? So initially, I had to drive to the lawyer's office to have him help me go through, the terms and things like that, and then there was only a few formal training where they sent me abroad to join, a few short courses on venture finance and things like that.
So did you go, do I have this right? Did you go to California to do the Berkeley course?
Yep.
What was that like?
It was a week-long course.
Was it really intensive?
On venture finance, very intensive. So full day, every day. And, me and Pat were the youngest, again. Students in the class where we're learning with VCs that are, have years of experience, either from, from a corporate in the finance field, or are actually VCs and have been doing that for years already. So I think the key learning, one interesting key learning I had from that was basically, even in Silicon Valley, people are still figuring things out.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. From the outside, it always looks like they know everything already.
Yep.
But they don't.
Yeah, they really don't, right? So they're still iterating on many things, right?
Sure.
There's not even a settled market practice for a lot of the investment terms yet. That's why you see, YC keeps changing their template. 500 also keeps changing our template. So it's very dynamic, and we have to kind of adjust as we go. There's no really a set formula for anything really in the startup world.
No, I mean, and there shouldn't be really, because if it was already set and if it was already cookie cutter, well, then what are you innovating on?
Yeah. Then what are you doing? Right?
What are you doing? Exactly. I want to talk a little bit about the sort of high level 500 startup just investment thesis.
Right.
This idea of what I like to call index investing as opposed to curated investing.
Right.
It's somewhere in the middle, but tell me what this thesis is so the audience can understand.
Yeah, so a little bit of a background, right? 500 started off, 11 years ago, back in 2010. Right. So, and our idea, our thesis was to build a large, diversified portfolio of startup.
Right.
And by diversified, I mean really diversified. Right.
I think Dave picked the number 500 because it was big enough for most people to think, wow, that's way too many.
Yep.
And small enough so he could actually get there. Because he could have said 10,000 startups.
That's true.
But nobody would have taken him seriously. Go ahead.
And now today we're at, I think, around 2,500 startups in 80 countries around the world. Right. So that was an interesting strategy to take when 10 years ago, everybody was focused on Silicon Valley. Right. So the idea was that, they believe that more and more unicorns or successful startups are going to come from outside of Silicon Valley. And I think that has been proven true. I think the latest number is around, 60% or something of unicorns are coming out of, outside of Silicon Valley.
It has to be that way. It just has to be that way by definition, because before the only innovation that was not innovation, but the only investing that was VC related was happening in and around Sand Hill Road.
Right.
The fact that now there are billions more people that live outside that area and have started investing, by just mathematical statistical definition, has to be true.
It just makes sense, right? Yeah. So why we set out to have this thesis of, investing in small checks, but in a very large number of startups is because we were in a lot of the emerging ecosystem and the emerging markets, right? So in Thailand specifically, when we started off around 5 years ago, there was barely any startups around, right? So if you're gonna be a fund that is, vertical driven,
it makes no sense.
It makes no
one
sense,
investment
right?
a year. Yeah, silliness.
So there has to be somebody who is really industry agnostic and really builds up the startup in numbers at the early stages, so that now today other CVC funds and other funds can then take the stick and run with it later on. Right?
Exactly. So do you think that was particularly important at the stage that Thailand was when that fund was started?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think I don't think other strategies would have worked, right? I think if you look at the Tech Source report a year or two ago, there are around 140, 150 funded startups in Thailand. Okay. And I think we've funded at least a third of them. Right.
Because you had multiple goals.
Right.
One of them was building the ecosystem. And there's failure is probably the wrong word, but there's smaller startups that are just not going to grow to super large size within that system, but still have to get funded so that the ecosystem grows. There have to be some of those to have some of these. Right?
Yep. And, especially in Thailand where people are a bit more conservative, right?
Fair enough.
Most of the CVCs, they do play at a later stage. Right. So that if there's nobody to kind of water the seeds initially, then there's no tree to pick on, afterwards.
Which is why I asked you that question earlier, if you consider yourself a risk taker. You could do similar roles working at some great corporate venture capital companies in Thailand, but it doesn't have the same feeling because they've been de-risked for the most part. You're investing into real risk.
Definitely.
Which is why I asked you earlier about that.
But that's also the beauty of the strategy here, right?
Sure.
It has built in and it allows for not mistakes, but risk to be taken and for us to be able to accept those outcomes which are not favorable, right? So
we're both doing the same thing. We don't want to say mistake and we don't want to say failures, but I'm going to say it now explicitly anyway. I've made investments and I've made plenty of mistakes. And I've failed at some other stuff. But when you win, and I want to go back because in 2014, Dave and I actually sat down and we ran through presentation material. And I know things have changed a lot in 6 years. But if you look at the theoretical investment model that 500 had back then, 80% of the startups were meant to fail, right?
Yep.
And only 1% were meant to be 40 times.
Yep.
And that was to get you to 3.9, almost 4 times
your money, basically.
Yeah. So I want to be explicit about this, right? Because failure is built in, and that's okay.
Yep.
Right.
I mean, we don't expect all our portfolio companies to be winners for sure, right? And then the other beauty of the strategy is also that, some other funds, they only aim for moonshots, right? You need to have the potential to, earn at least 10, 20, 30x.
Right.
Our strategy is also built for, small to medium-sized exits as well.
Sure.
Right? So
Wouldn't you rather have 10, $50 million exits than no other exits at all?
Right.
Of course.
Yep.
Right. And if you understand, I like to make baseball analogies. If you understand baseball at all, the guys that are hitting singles and doubles have much longer careers, make more money than the guys who are striking out 100 times a year by hitting 60 home runs.
Right. I'm completely blank there because I don't know baseball at all.
But I'm just saying, that's why I said if you do. But you understand the concept, right?
Yep.
You just want to have a bunch of little wins.
Yep.
Some of them are going to get much larger. And if they do, you're going to win at scale. I want to talk about the 3 key pillars of venture capital investing as you understand them, and then maybe break them down so I can understand them better.
Okay, sure. So this is what I've learned actually pre-joining 500, just on the internet. There's so much good content on the internet, right?
Oh my God.
I've kind of stick with it in my job as well because, in an investment manager job in a fund, there's not really a set rigorous structure for you to follow, right? In an hour, you could be helping one company recruit.
Right.
In an hour, you could be joining a board meeting. So, you're kind of all over the place sometimes. So this is my structure where I used to help keep me kind of sane, right? So it's source, selection, and then service, right? So it's kind of my flywheel where if we do these 3 things well, the fund will run well, right?
And inside the fund, are there 3 separate groups that do that? Or is it the responsibility of every fund manager to source deals, I want to get this right, to select the best ones and then to service them?
Right.
So you do all those things.
We do all those things, right? So we have a very small team of the 3 partners and then the 2 investment managers, right?
Okay, and that's it?
And that's it, right? So we try to do everything, and it's an initiative from Grating as well, where he wants us to be well-rounded and be able to do everything, right?
Absolutely.
Other funds around them a bit more functionalized. So one might only be a portfolio manager working on the service side.
Right.
One might only be sourcing the deals, right? So I don't think there's a right or wrong way to go about it. As the fund matures and you get bigger, you might have to be a bit more systemized.
Maybe.
But at least for us, right, we do all 3, right? And I'm happy for it, actually.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What do you so what is your selection process like? How do you make that decision of, I have these 3 companies that maybe are doing similar things where the founders are good, but I like this one better. How do you select?
So, I mean, I think you hear this all the time, right? But actually, team is definitely the first thing, and everything else is secondary for us. Because, especially at the early stages, right? Because, we've seen companies fail just because of the team. It has nothing to do with the
product,
with the business or the product.
For sure.
Right? So, especially at the early stage, sometimes we kind of bet on the rider rather than
the horse. For
yeah.
sure. Look, 50% of marriages in the United States fail, right? So why should that be any statistically different for startup founders?
Right, exactly.
Because it's just as hard.
So this is also a thing I learned from my old bosses at Impact Tech, where when we meet a startup, they like to really get into their idea and their product very quickly, right? In the first 5 minutes.
Right.
And Yoav and Kermit are always, hey, stop, slow down.
Right.
Tell me about your journey. Tell me about your background and how it leads up to you starting this startup, right? And I think that's very important, that the founder has a clear and strong reason to start this startup, because that'll be the thing that would help them through the difficult times. Because
absolutely, because if there's no look, again, it's just like a great marriage. If that union is not based on something that's strong, other than just the desire to be married, well, then it's never going to work, because you have nothing to fall back on.
Exactly.
I talk to founders about this all the time.
And it's a commitment you have to make for 5, 6, 7, even more than 10 years, right? It's not just a a short-term thing.
No.
Right? And this is what I've seen throughout the pandemic last year as well, where the founders who have a really strong foundation of why they want to start this startup, even if revenue is shot down to 0 for 6 months, they're still fighting, they're still persevering.
Yes.
And they don't have any doubts that they want to quit and go back to a corporate job.
Right. So one of the things that I've seen over the past, let's just say 10 years in the startup world, is the founders that are chasing like the hot new thing. Like, I'm going to build a photo app with a little twist because photo apps are popular, or I'm going to go into Bitcoin because I heard it's the next big thing. They will fail. They may get lucky, but they will fail because they're always going to be chasing the thing that's already done. Right?
Yep.
Yeah. But if they have a real passion for it, I think this is why most people misunderstand passion. If they really love that thing and the journey to founding was real and sincere, they have a much better chance at succeeding.
I totally agree with you on that.
Does that make sense? Okay. So which part of this business is most satisfying to you? In other words, is it the sourcing part? Is it the selection part? Or is it the service part where you're helping them hire somebody, or you introduce them to somebody who buys their product, something like that? What's the best part for you?
So definitely it's the service part where, post-investment, we get to really help them with, what they can't do on themselves.
Right.
The introductions, the experience and insights from, seeing a dozen other startups go through the same problems. So actually service is definitely the most rewarding thing. And also, you're kind of helping others to succeed, right? Helping them to successfully raise their next round and kind of extend their dream journey for another year or two, at least for now, right?
In a way, I look at it almost like raising a child. You're not doing the thing. You're creating these sort of guardrails and just kind of easing it along. And it's really satisfying to like go home at night and to see that progress. No one's going to high five you,
right?
But you're going to know, like, that little tweak thing that I just recommended, maybe it's going to work. That's the real satisfaction.
Definitely. And when we have a catch-up meeting or whatever, and then 2-3 months down the line, we have another one. And then they said like, hey, what we talked about last time worked.
That worked.
Right?
Yeah. I just get a chill thinking about it.
Yeah.
It's really nice, right?
It's really nice. But, it's also a balancing thing as well when you have a big portfolio, right?
Of course.
The pandemic, a lot of the companies were thriving, but obviously there were a few that were struggling really hard as well, right?
Exactly.
So within the same few hours, I might be having one phone call that is very, very positive.
Right.
And then a complete switch to a company that is running out of money and is struggling to find extra capital. Right?
I understand. Yeah, so the ups and downs are super high and low. And it's weird, again, because it's not your business, but there's this visceral feeling of like, again, it's my offspring.
Yep.
I don't want you to fail, but I can't fix this maybe. And that hurts.
And sometimes you have to make the decision with the fund's best interest in mind as well, right? You can't just give capital away without thinking about it properly.
No, right? You can't throw good money after bad, right?
We have responsibility to
I understand that.
our investors, right? So, but then again, I think for me, sourcing is also very rewarding for me.
Okay.
At least I think it's also one of my favorite parts of the job, right? I'm learning from people every time I meet them.
For sure.
And they're coming from all sorts of industries, right?
Right.
The best meetings I have are the ones that, I come out and it's like I've learned from, a guy's whole life working in a certain industry, right? And
that
I get
you knew
to do
nothing
that
about,
every week.
maybe, right?
Yeah.
So think about how I feel. I've done 500 or more recorded conversations in the last 3 years. The best part for me is this, because I get to ask you questions that I'm really interested in.
Right.
And I get to learn something every single time I do this.
Yep.
So I understand that feeling completely.
Same thing exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Last thing. What do you think is going to change the game in Thailand in the VC space?
In the VC space.
Yep.
So definitely, I think if we look at Thailand and the ecosystem as a whole, right? It probably started off, 7 to 8 years ago, where we now see startups who have gone through that 6 or 7 or 8 years, getting close to the point where they could have a big exit, right? And if you look at an ecosystem, if you look at people like Grab or even the unicorns on the Western side of the world, they usually take 9 to 12 years to really mature and go into the stock market or have a big exit. So I think we're a few years away from that. So I think, the next year to 3 year would be an exciting time for the ecosystem here, where once we start to see that exits,
right?
And I think there are a few already in preparation.
You can
for
see
that.
them coming, right?
Yeah. So once we have that, we kind of fully complete the loop from, starting a startup, running it and scaling it up into a point where you have a big exit.
Right.
And then, obviously those guys, even some of those guys are starting now. The founders are angel investing. Some hopefully would start out new funds. And then that recycling of both talent, capital, and resources, and also learning.
Right. That's that flywheel you were talking about.
Exactly.
It has to start spinning faster, and it started to spin. You can feel it.
Yep.
Exactly. And look, one of my famous phrases is, "Everybody's an overnight success 10 years later."
Right.
I've said this to you before, right?
Yeah.
And it's exactly what you're talking about. It looks like it's overnight because that's when most people hear about it.
Right.
But they've been toiling away for a decade.
Definitely. It's not just like, you create an app in your house for a night and then bang. No way. Yeah.
Okay. I really want to thank you. To Jaruthassanakul, a senior investment manager at 500 Startups. This was awesome.
Thanks for having me, Michael. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. TDPK Podcasts.